We'd like to talk for a few minutes about how to install the Guardian ducted unit. When you get the unit, of course, uncrate it, inspect it, make sure there's no obvious damage, and you should plug it in at that point. Even before you go ahead with the installation, you can just plug it into the wall and make sure it starts up. Have a little bit of patience because there's a 5-minute time delay on the compressor, so you want to leave it plugged in for at least 5 minutes and then let it start operation. By the way, this unit really doesn't require any specific electrical circuiting. It has a plug. This happens to be the North American plug. There are other plugs that are used in other markets, but it's really intended to be plugged into the wall. So once you've inspected the unit and started it up to make sure that it's operating correctly, it's time to choose the location for the unit. Now, when you're locating the unit, it's important to understand how far you can run the ducts. And of course, how far you can run the ducts depends on whether it's round flex ducting or sheet metal ducting. It depends on whether that ducting is going to take a 90-degree angle or go gently upwards towards the outside of the building. But as a general rule of thumb, you have about 25 feet between the wine cellar and the unit, and an additional 25 feet between the unit and the outside of the building. In other words, in meters, you have roughly 6 meters between the wine cellar and the unit, and an additional 6 meters on the outside. So, you can install this unit actually quite a ways from the cellar and quite a ways from the outside, but you do have to consider those duct runs. On our very largest unit, the duct runs are even a bit more than that because it has a much higher static pressure both on the condenser and the evaporator. So once you've decided on where to locate the unit due to the duct configuration, you need to understand how to mount it. And there are many ways to mount it. You can mount it on a shelf coming out from the wall, you can suspend it from the ceiling, and you can mount it just above the floor, probably about 8 inches or about 20 centimeters up off the floor as well. And since you have these panels, you can choose a wide variety of duct configurations. In fact, it is possible to use more than one set of supply ducts on the side of the cellar. You can imagine one large return duct coming from the cellar to the units and 2 supply ducts coming back to the cellar to give better airflow within the cellar. Okay, let's now think about where you may be running these ducts, because you have a lot of flexibility and your choice of duct runs has a lot to do with where you're going to position the unit. Here on the external side of the unit, you have the air coming here right into the filter, and you have these choice of 3 panels here. You could be using just one of them, that's most likely, but you could actually be running 2 or even 3 ducts over here. More interesting perhaps is on the cellar side, because here you're going to have the air coming back from the cellar, coming back into the end of the unit. But you can be returning the conditioned air to the cellar through 1, 2, or even 3 ducts. So you need to consider that. If you're using 2 or 3 ducts, you can get some really nice airflow within the wine cellar. But you need to consider that as you're doing the installation. We do supply these extra duct collars, so you can install 2 or even 3 ducts coming from the cellar, or coming to the cellar, I should say. Similarly, you don't have to use this on the top of the unit. If you wanted to install the unit very high up towards the ceiling, you could remove this duct collar, install it perhaps here or on the other side, and use this same panel to seal off the top of the unit. So when you're considering where to locate the unit, you really do have to consider the ductwork you're going to be using. Perhaps the most important thing at this point, when you do decide to mount the unit, is to make sure that it is absolutely level. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the condensate drain. We've already talked about how important it is to install this unit so it is perfectly level. Once you do have it leveled and in place, we have to install the condensate drain. You see the connection here. I want to mention that there's a trap inside this unit. There's a trap inside this unit. Please do not try to install a second trap on the outside of the unit. It's not necessary and in fact can create problems. So the condensate needs to get away from the unit. There are many ways to do that. You can run a plastic tube down into a drain in the floor of the wine cellar. You can use a condensate pump, much like on a residential air conditioning system, to move the condensate away from the unit. Also, a word about the electrical connections. Yes, it is plug and play, but please try to keep it on its own electrical circuit, and please do not use any extension cords beyond this length to operate the unit. Let's talk about mounting the Guardian thermostat. It's actually a control panel which controls both temperature and humidity. We have these communications ports. It's very simple. You take this wire, you can run this through the wall or however you need to, and plug it into the communications port. It is really essential that you use the wire that Winegardien has supplied with this unit. Please do not try to use any other type of wire because it can create problems with the unit. So anyway, the thermostat itself should be installed at a typical temperature and humidity location in the cellar. What does that really mean? Probably sort of midpoint on the wall, somewhere where the air circulation is good, somewhere where you'd want the ideal temperature and humidity. Obviously, you need to be able to read the temperature and humidity on this, and you want to be able to easily access the screen to change the settings. Now this assumes the simplest installation, and that's the controller inside the wine cellar. Don't forget that we offer much more sophisticated options. It is possible, for example, to have the readout, the display, outside of the wine cellar. In our controls video, you can go into more detail on how to make sure that this thermostat is no longer sensing temperature and humidity if it's outside the cellar. Also, remember we have a second communications port here. It's possible to install up to 3 sensors within the wine cellar using our splitter and communications port 2. Once again, if you're using more than one sensor, you want them to average. And the machine knows how to do the averaging, but you want them to average to the point of control you'd like. So you probably want a sensor up high on the wall somewhere, a sensor perhaps on the far wall, maybe even one sensor somewhere low in the wall, because it's going to take the average of the 2 or 3 sensors you put into the space. Now once the unit is finally in place, ductwork connected, drain line run correctly, perfectly level, it's time to turn the unit on. That's very simply just flip the switch. But remember, not much is going to happen. There's a 5-minute time delay on the compressor, so you're going to have to wait at least 5 minutes for the unit to start cooling. In the meantime, the thermostat will start to display a high temperature fault. Almost certainly the wine cellar is not at wine cellar conditions when you first turn the unit on. So after the time delay, it will start to pull the temperature down, and once it reaches 68 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 18 degrees C, that fault will stop flashing, and of course it will continue on down to the set point. Now these controls do have a wide variety of settings which can be adjusted. They're set from the factory, ready to go for pretty common cellars, but you can adjust many of them. That's quite an involved topic. We have a separate video on that subject, and of course our installation manual has great detail on how to change the settings of the humidity and temperature device. So thank you.